She knocked on his door begging for warmth. What he saw in her eyes changed him forever. The wind howled across the empty plains, but that was nothing compared to the storm that walked into his cabin. A desperate woman, a haunting gaze, and a past filled with betrayal, violence, and secrets too terrible to speak aloud. What Jacob would discover about her story would test his courage, his morals, and everything he thought he knew about surviving in a world that had forgotten mercy. Watch until the end, you won't believe what happens next. The wind howled across the desolate plains, a mournful wail that echoed between the jagged cliffs and shadowy canyons of the Wild West. Dust swirled like lost spirits in the fading light of day, settling on the weathered wooden door of a modest cabin, its paint peeling and faded, memories of brighter days trapped beneath layers of neglect. Inside, a man named Jacob Turner sat hunched over a table, his calloused hands gripping a worn-out whiskey bottle, the amber liquid dancing inside like a flickering flame, tempting him to forget the weight of his solitude. A former cattleman, Jacob had lost everything to a ruthless drought that had turned his once thriving ranch into a graveyard of withered dreams. The land that had once cradled his hopes now lay barren, just like his heart. He was a man marked by tragedy, his spirit dulled by the relentless sun and a cruel hand of fate. The world outside was a harsh mistress, filled with outlaws and whispers of gold, but for Jacob it had become a place of endless night, where even the stars seemed to have abandoned him. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the prairie, a sudden knock shattered the silence. It was a sound so foreign to him that he hesitated, unsure if he had truly heard it. The knock came again, louder this time, urgent and desperate. With a reluctant sigh, Jacob rose from his chair, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight like the bones of an old man. He wiped the whiskey from his lips, the bitter taste lingering, and approached the door, suspicion etched on his face. Peering through the grimy window, he caught a glimpse of her, a figure silhouetted against the twilight, her silhouette fragile and frail. She stood there, shivering, her long hair tangled and wild, clothes torn and dirty. Jacob's heart, long encased in ice, stirred slightly at the sight of her. He opened the door, the hinges groaning in protest, revealing a woman whose eyes were the color of stormy skies, filled with a desperation that struck him like a bullet. "Please," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper as she stumbled forward. I need warmth, just for a moment." Jacob's instincts screamed at him to turn her away. The world outside was unkind, filled with dangers that lurked in the shadows, but something in her gaze held him captive. It was a plea not just for warmth, but for humanity, a flicker of hope in a world that had forgotten how to care. He stepped aside, allowing her to enter, and felt the chill of the night seep into the cabin as she crossed the threshold. She was barely more than a girl, with skin kissed by the sun and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. She sank onto the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees, trembling like a leaf caught in a storm. Jacob moved to stoke the dying embers of the fireplace, the flames flickering to life, casting a warm glow that danced across her face. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice gravelly from disuse, as he handed her a rough blanket he had kept for chilly nights. She looked up, and for a moment Jacob was lost in the depths of her eyes. "I was with a group of settlers," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "We were headed west for a new life, but we got ambushed by bandits. They took everything, my family, and left me for dead." Tears glistened on her cheeks, illuminated by the firelight, and Jacob felt a pang in his chest, a yearning to protect her from the cruelty of the world. "Why didn't you go back?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. The Wild West was unforgiving, and survivors were often left to fend for themselves. "There's nothing left for me there," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I just wanted to find a place where I could feel safe, even if just for a moment." Jacob's heart ached at her words. He had known loss too, though his was buried deep, hidden under layers of bitterness and regret. The loneliness that had wrapped around him like a shroud began to lift, if only slightly, as he realized that they were both seeking refuge from a world that had turned its back on them. As she huddled by the fire, he found himself drawn to her resilience. The flicker of hope in her eyes ignited something within him, a longing for connection, for the warmth of companionship that had long been extinguished in his soul. He watched as she began to relax, the tension in her shoulders easing, and he felt a stirring of purpose, something he hadn't felt in years. But the world outside remained cruel and unyielding. As the night deepened, the howling wind intensified, carrying with it the echoes of a distant gunshot, a reminder of the dangers that lurked beyond the safety of his cabin. Jacob's instincts kicked in, and he felt a rush of protectiveness for this fragile girl. She had entered his life like a sudden storm, bringing with her a chance for redemption, and he was determined to shield her from the tempest that raged outside. Yet as he stood there, watching her lean into the warmth of the fire, a nagging thought echoed in the recesses of his mind. He had been a fool to let her in, to believe that kindness could exist in a world filled with darkness. But as he gazed into her stormy eyes, he found himself willing to take that risk, to gamble on the possibility of compassion in a world that had long since forgotten its meaning. Little did Jacob know, this single act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would alter the course of their lives forever. In that moment, as he stood guard over her fragile form, he felt the first stirrings of hope, a flicker of warmth that promised to thaw the ice encasing his heart. Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Jacob stood in the flickering glow of the cabin's firelight, the warmth of the flames battling the chill that seeped in through the cracks of the weathered logs. The woman sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a tin mug of steaming broth, the steam rising like whispered secrets into the still air. She was fragile, yet there was a strength in her gaze, a flicker of defiance that spoke of survival against all odds. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it echoed in the silence of the cabin like a beautiful melody. Jacob nodded, unable to find his voice. He watched her as she sipped the broth, the warmth of it spreading life back into her cheeks, which had been ghostly pale, like the first light of dawn breaking across a starlit sky. "I'm sorry for barging in like that," she continued, a hint of embarrassment coloring her words. "I didn't know where else to go." He could see the shadows of pain dancing in her eyes, shadows that mirrored his own. "You're safe here," he replied, his voice rough like gravel, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "For now." A silence settled between them, thick with unspoken fears. Outside, the wind howled like a tortured soul, rattling the cabin's shutters. Jacob's heart clenched. The gunshots he had heard earlier were a reminder of the dangers lurking beyond the fragile walls of his sanctuary, a reminder that kindness could come at a price. Did they find your family?" Jacob's voice trembled slightly, betraying the weight of the question. He hated himself for asking, for dragging her back into that dark place, but he needed to know. He needed to understand the ghost that haunted her, the specter that had driven her to his door. For a moment, her gaze flickered away, lost in the shadows of memories he couldn't fathom. "They didn't," she said finally, her voice breaking like brittle ice. "My father, my mother, they were taken by the bandits. I was lucky to escape." Her hands trembled around the mug, and Jacob felt a surge of anger rise within him, hot and fierce. Those bastards had stolen everything from her, just as the drought had taken everything from him. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling hollow against the weight of her loss. She looked up then, and for a fleeting moment, the darkness in her eyes flickered with something brighter, determination, perhaps. "I'm not looking for pity. I just need to find a way to keep going." "Then we'll find a way," Jacob said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. It was a promise he hadn't meant to make, a thread of hope he didn't know he still held. The fire crackled softly, and as they sat in the fading light, the warmth between them began to thaw the frost that had settled in Jacob's heart. He watched her as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the movement delicate, like a flower bending to the wind. There was something about her, something that stirred a longing within him, a yearning for connection he thought he had buried long ago. "Do you have any plans?" he asked, breaking the silence that had grown thick again. "For what comes next?" She hesitated, and in that pause he felt the weight of her uncertainty. "I don't know. I thought I'd go to the next town, but—" Her voice trailed off, the unspoken fears hanging heavy between them. "But it's not safe," he finished for her, and she nodded, her eyes glimmering with unshed tears. "There are bandits everywhere, and they'll be looking for you." "Then what do I do?" Her voice cracked, desperation seeping through her words like rain on parched earth. A thought crossed Jacob's mind, unbidden and unexpected. "You could stay here," he said, his heart racing at the implication. The cabin was small, and he had grown used to solitude, but the idea of her presence, a flicker of warmth against the cold of his life, sent a jolt of energy through him. "Stay here?" she echoed, disbelief coloring her tone. "You don't even know me." "And you don't know me," he replied, the truth hanging between them. "But you need shelter, and I could use the company." She studied him, searching for something in his expression. He felt exposed beneath her gaze, like a book laid open for her to read. "I don't want to be a burden," she finally said, her voice softening. "You wouldn't be." The sincerity in his voice surprised even him, but it was true. In that moment, he realized he was tired of his own company, tired of the haunting memories that wrapped around him like a noose. "Just until you figure out your next move, I can't let you go out there alone." A flicker of hope danced behind her eyes, and for the first time since she had knocked on his door, Jacob felt something shift within him. It was as if a long-forgotten ember had ignited back to life. "All right," she said, her voice steadier now. "I'll stay, just for a little while." "Good," Jacob said, relief washing over him like a warm tide. "We'll figure this out together." As the night deepened, they spoke of small things, memories of home, dreams that seemed as distant as the stars outside. Jacob learned her name was Lila, and with each word exchanged, the walls around his heart began to crumble brick by brick. The wind howled outside, but inside the cabin they found a fragile peace, a connection that intertwined their fates in ways neither could yet understand. Hours slipped away, and the fire danced low, casting shadows that flickered like ghosts on the walls. Jacob leaned back in his chair, fatigue pulling at his eyelids, and he felt a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. "Jacob?" Lila's voice cut through the silence, soft yet insistent. "Yeah?" He blinked, startled from his reverie. "What was it like before everything changed?" Her question hung in the air, and he found himself lost in memories of sun-drenched fields, the smell of fresh grass, and the laughter of friends long gone. "It was beautiful," he said slowly, the words tasting bittersweet on his tongue. "I had a ranch, cattle, I had people around me." "What happened?" she pressed, her eyes wide, filled with a gentle curiosity that made his heart ache. He hesitated, feeling the weight of his past pressing down on him like a heavy cloak. The drought came. It took everything. I lost my family, my friends. I was left with nothing but this cabin. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and he could see the understanding in her eyes. "It's all right," he replied, though it didn't feel all right. "It's just how it is." The fire crackled again, and he felt the warmth of Lila's presence beside him, a balm for his wounded soul. In that moment, he understood something profound. Her pain mirrored his own, and in sharing their stories, they were weaving a new tapestry of connection, one that held the promise of healing. As the night deepened, Jacob found himself drifting off, lulled by the soft cadence of Lila's breathing. For the first time in years, he felt something he thought he'd lost to the wind: hope. But outside, the night was not done with them yet. The shadows shifted, and the dangerous world beyond the cabin's walls was still watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Chapter 3. Chapter 3. The wind howled outside, a mournful wail that seemed to echo the sorrowful tales shared between Jacob and Lila. The cabin, once a mere shelter from the unforgiving elements, now felt like a fragile cocoon, holding two wounded souls together against the encroaching darkness. A flickering oil lamp cast soft shadows on the walls, illuminating the old wooden beams that groaned under the weight of memories. Jacob sat across from Lila, a modest wooden table separating them, yet the distance felt far less than the chasms carved by their pasts. He watched her as she wrapped her slender fingers around a chipped mug of warm tea, steam rising like a ghost trying to escape. Her blue eyes, once filled with terror, now shimmered with a hint of something softer, a flicker of trust that made his heart ache and swell simultaneously. "I can't remember the last time I felt this safe," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, almost as if she feared the word might shatter the fragile peace they had created. Jacob nodded, unable to articulate the rush of emotion that accompanied her admission. In that moment, he realized the warmth they shared wasn't just from the flickering flames of the hearth. It was the warmth of understanding, of shared suffering that began to thaw the ice around his heart. He cleared his throat, the sound breaking the stillness like a stone dropped into still waters. "I reckon it ain't easy to find safe ground these days," he said, his voice gruff yet tender. "This world's tough, and folks can be tougher still." He looked away momentarily, memories flooding back uninvited, the faces of friends lost to the drought, the laughter that had faded into silence. But sometimes you gotta hold on to what little warmth you can find. Lila's gaze fell to her hands, and for a heartbeat, Jacob feared he had pushed too hard, too fast. But then she looked up, her eyes holding his with a fierce determination that startled him. "I'm not looking for easy, Jacob, just a chance to breathe without the weight of fear on my shoulders." His heart thundered in his chest. She was right. Life had become a series of daunting battles, and he had fought alone for too long. But now, with her sitting across from him, he felt the stirrings of a different kind of fight, a fight worth having. The wind rattled the cabin walls as if trying to break in, and Lila flinched, her eyes darting to the window. Jacob noticed the way her body tensed, and he felt the urge to reach out, to reassure her that they were safe here, at least for now. "We can't stay in this cabin forever," he said, letting the truth spill out like water from a cracked jug. "We need to think about what comes next." Lila nodded slowly, her brow furrowing in thought. "I can't go back to where I came from," she said, her voice trembling. "It's gone. The life I had, the people I loved. The bandits, they took everything." Jacob's heart ached for her, the rawness of her pain echoing his own. He had lost his family to the land, the drought carving out their lives like a thief in the night. But her loss was different. It was a violent erasure, and he felt a surge of protectiveness wash over him. "You're safe here, Lila. I won't let them find you." Silence wrapped around them, thick like the tendrils of smoke curling from the fire. Lila's eyes searched his, seeking something buried deep within. "And what about you, Jacob? What if they come for you?" He chuckled, the sound rough and unexpected. "I reckon I'm not worth much to anybody anymore." The words tasted bitter, but they were true. "Just a stubborn old fool with a cabin and too many ghosts." "Maybe you're not as stubborn as you think," Lila replied, her voice steady. "You opened your door to me when you could have turned me away. That's something." Jacob's heart quickened, her words igniting a flame within him that he had thought long extinguished. "You think so?" he asked, his tone half jesting, half serious. Lila smiled, a gentle curve of her lips that felt like sunlight breaking through a stormy sky. "I do, and I think you have more fight left in you than you realize." The conversation lingered, wrapping around them like a warm embrace. But as the fire crackled and the shadows danced, the reality of their situation loomed larger than life outside those fragile walls. Jacob knew this moment of peace was only temporary, and the outside world was still a treacherous place. The following days passed in a blur of quiet companionship. They settled into a routine, a rhythm that felt almost normal, as if the outside chaos had faded into a mere whisper. Mornings brought the soft golden light spilling through the cracks in the cabin, revealing the dust motes floating like tiny stars. They would share breakfast, Lila's laughter ringing like music against Jacob's gruff responses as they traded stories about their pasts, pieces of themselves laid bare over the simple act of sharing a meal. Jacob found himself drawn to her resilience, the way she refused to let despair shackle her spirit. Each night, as they sat by the fire, he would watch her profile illuminated by the flames, her hair catching the light like spun gold. Despite the shadows of her experiences, she radiated a warmth he hadn't felt in years, and with it came the slow realization that he was falling for her. But with each passing day, the outside world grew more restless, the tension palpable. The howling wind became a constant reminder of the danger lurking just beyond the walls of their sanctuary. Jacob began to hear whispers in the night, the echoes of distant hoofbeats, the unsettling rustle of the brush that suggested others were out there, searching for something, someone. One evening, as dusk settled over the plains, Jacob stepped outside to gather firewood. The air was crisp, the sky painted in shades of purple and gold. He took a moment to breathe it in, to savor the fleeting beauty of the moment. But as he reached for a log, he caught sight of movement in the distance, a figure silhouetted against the dying light, riding hard across the plains. His heart raced as he turned back toward the cabin, urgency flooding his veins. "Leela!" he called, his voice strained with panic. "Get inside, now!" She appeared at the door, confusion etched across her face. "What is it?" "There's someone coming," he replied, the gravity of the situation crashing down around them. "We need to hide." Panic flickered in her eyes, and for a moment all the progress they had made felt like it was crumbling before them. But then, with a resolve that surprised him, she nodded. "What do we do?" "Stay low and don't make a sound," he instructed, his voice low but firm. They quickly moved inside, the door creaking ominously as they shut it tight behind them. Jacob grabbed the lantern and snuffed out the flame, plunging them into darkness. They crouched together in the corner of the cabin, the air thick with tension as the sound of hoofbeats drew closer. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest like a war drum. He could feel Lila's presence beside him, her warmth radiating even in the chill of fear that wrapped around them. The voice of a man drifted through the night, low and rumbling, like thunder rolling across the plains. "I know you're in there, Turner. Open up!" Jacob's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the voice. It was one of the ranchers from a neighboring spread, a man he had once called a friend. But that was before the drought had turned friends into enemies, before survival had become a ruthless game. "Jacob," Lila whispered, her voice trembling, "what do we do?" "Just stay quiet," he murmured, clenching his fists as he fought against the rising tide of dread. The sound of hooves stopped, and Jacob held his breath, every instinct screaming at him to protect her. "Open up, damn it!" the man shouted again, anger lacing his tone. "We know you've got someone with you. It ain't safe for a girl out here alone. Let her come with us." The offer hung in the air like a noose, tightening around Jacob's throat. He could hear the desperation mingling with the threat in the man's voice. They wanted Lila, and he wouldn't let that happen, not after everything they had shared, after the bond they had formed. "Go away!" Jacob shouted back, his voice ringing with defiance. "She ain't going anywhere with you!" The man outside laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "You think you can protect her from us? You're just a washed-up cattleman hiding in a shack. You're not a fortress, Jacob." Jacob's heart raced, but he stood his ground. He could feel Lila's hand gripping his tightly, her fear radiating off her like heat from the fire. He turned to her, his expression fierce. "I won't let them take you." Suddenly, the man slammed a fist against the door, the wood rattling violently. "You think this is just about you? She's got nowhere else to go, Turner. You're putting her life in danger by keeping her here." "Then let them come for me!" Jacob roared, his defiance a shield against the terror closing in around them. "You won't touch her!" In that moment, he felt a shift within himself, a stirring of purpose that felt foreign yet exhilarating. He was willing to fight for her, to protect what little light she had brought into his life. The urgency of the situation transformed into a burning resolve, and he would not back down. The man outside hesitated, the silence stretching between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Jacob could hear the man's breath, ragged and frustrated, and he knew this standoff could end in violence. But he wouldn't let fear dictate his actions anymore. "Get ready, Lila," he whispered, his voice steady. "If they come through that door, we'll face them together." Her eyes widened, a mixture of fear and admiration flashing across her face. "Together," she echoed, her voice a quiet vow that wrapped around them like a promise. As the night deepened and the wind howled like a pack of wolves, two souls stood united against the storm. In that moment, Jacob knew that he had found something worth fighting for, and he would not let it slip away. The bonds they had forged in the warmth of shared pain had created something stronger, a hope that could withstand even the harshest of winters.